Hey, what's going on, everybody? My name is Corey, better known as the Seaman, and I want to welcome you to another edition of the Seaman's Cinema Sit-Down, and back in for a little more Spooktober action. A little Spooktober action you should have got yesterday. Our first double feature beat me down. I forgot how freaking long these two movies are, and I don't say that like in a way where it's a negative to the movie. I think I would take more. There's a version, an ultimate version of these two movies put together by Andy Muschietti that he hopes to get out one day. They're like 6-7 hours long, which is just crazy. But the length doesn't hurt the movies. It's just like on a night where I'm supposed to do a review, I was really tired by the end. And I went to bed. So I'm playing a little catch up today, but as you can see in front of you, this is your first time coming out to check out the Spooktober run. All month long I've been watching, reviewing different scary, spooky Halloween movies. I think to this point it's been a pretty good mixture of classic and new school and different types of, horror. And yesterday's double feature was a day I was super looking forward to because I adored this piece of Stephen King material. I'm a big fan of Andy Muschietti, and seeing this material adapted in a more realistic, horrifying way than even the TV miniseries was something I was stoked for. So let me pull up the chair, man. Take a seat. We're getting ready to dive into it. Chapters 1 and 2. And yes, I know, like I said, length yesterday kind of beat me where I got to do the review today. But it is a movie that I would eat up 6 or 7 hours of, man, because everything that Andy Muschietti does with this film, for me, works. From a filmmaking standpoint, I love the way he shoots this thing. I think it is beautifully terrifying and creepy. Just the way in which the camera works in and around these massive set pieces that he builds, which is one of the other things that's tremendous with both of these movies. From the Neibolt house to its lair, just the kinds of monsters and forms that it takes on throughout the movie to scare the kids and the adults. Doesn't matter what it is. Any of these big set pieces, I think, just works visually in and of itself. And the storytelling and adaptation of the material, I think, is superb. I love the 80s TV miniseries. It's just super out of date, and it's kind of cheesy outside of Tim Curry. I'm not by nature scared of clowns. Tim Curry made me terrified of clowns for quite some time. And now Bill Skarsgard is doing the same thing, man. But, like I said, that original, especially now when you rewatch it, it's really cheesy at times. And watching the material be adapted in that really realistic, like no matter what era or age we watch this version of it, it's going to always live up to that terrifying standard because it is just done in a way that you couldn't have pulled off back then. And we're able to do more with it and Pennywise and the way he attacks the kids. And like I said, the adaptation of the material is really, really, really good. Stuff that you couldn't necessarily pull off back when they did the TV miniseries. And in both instances, you can't really completely pull off this Stephen King book. It's well over 1,000 pages. I mean, the soft cover is massive. But it's the material in and of itself. Outside the context of a book, things like the Macroverse, the Ritual of Chud, are things that would be really hard to pull off because it is really, really out there. I mean, there's a long stretch of time where Stephen King was doing drugs and writing, and some of the things got really out there. I mean, he wrote Cujo in like a weekend on a coke bender and doesn't remember writing it. So, I mean, things like the Macroverse, where it actually comes from, the Ritual of Chud, which, involves biting the tongue of your opponent. So, like, Pennywise bites the kid tongue, and the kid bites Pennywise's tongue, and they get transported to this other place where they have this battle of wits, where it's basically like a joke off. You got to make the other laugh. If you try to do that in the movie, I promise you people would not be okay with it, or would be like, what was that? But what Muschietti does, as far as giving us a glimpse into some sort of origin for it, from the little urn thing that he has, when we see that vision of what like him coming to Earth was like, it's a pretty good visual adaptation of something that I think would be really, really difficult to tell in the course of a story. But then to actually take a swing at the Ritual of Chud, I was elated. And yes, different, but it kind of holds that essence. They're not doing jokes. They're making him small verbally by putting him in his place, and just kind of having this battle of willpower. Like, our will of you are nothing, you don't scare us, is going to outdo what you can do from a scare tactic. And while in both versions, it's not the strongest of endings, and I love the fact that Muschietti makes jokes about the fact that Stephen King has habitually been really bad at endings, and that Stephen King appears in Chapter 2 and plays into that joke himself with his cameo. I love that stuff. But, they're not the strongest. However, visually, and that's the thing that Muschietti does best in this movie, visually, that ending is gripping. Like, watching, him change to the different forms as they're bearing down on him, and then him melting into the ground and becoming that mushy version of Pennywise. Visually, it really, really pops, and across the board, the visuals are phenomenal. From, like I said, the massive set pieces that he builds. The Neibolt house is gorgeous and horrifying. Same with its lair. And all the different forms that he takes on, and we're going to talk about those in a little bit. But everything that he does from the visual medium of the storytelling, I just think is spectacular. And then the story itself, more so in Chapter 1 than Chapter 2. I know some people came down on Chapter 2 for, like, not having a great story or like, plot line the way that Chapter 1 was, as far as, like, being gripping and really getting invested. And I go, well, think of this as, like, the Avengers of horror, right? Like, Infinity War is the movie you get all the story, you get all the best story parts, all the things that you like from that, element of a movie exist in Infinity War. Endgame is the big epic conclusion where it's like you got enough of the storyline and plot to make it work in the movie, and then it's more about the spectacle of, like, boom, here's our massive finale. That's what we get with Chapters 1 and 2. The first one has a lot of story beats, and things that really pull you in, and that's why I like watching it back to back, because that second one, yeah, it's more spectacle, but it is horrifying and just delicious to watch. And like I said, outside of everything that Muschietti's doing, so much of that story's heart is in that first one. That's because that cast of kids were just phenomenal. Going in, we knew Finn Wolfhard coming from Stranger Things, although taking on Richie Tozier, totally different beast than what we were used to. And when he did Richie, this was the spot where I was like, that's where you gotta keep an eye on this kid. Like, he's probably my third favorite character on Stranger Things, my favorite character in this movie, and just showed you the range that he has as an actor. He really, really popped. But most of this cast does. Jack Dylan Grazer as Eddie Kazbrak, brilliant. Right away is someone who pops on screen, and so much of that has to do with his back and forth with Finn Wolfhard, as Eddie and Richie are constantly going at it. But even just taking in all the fears and all of the just being afraid of, like, getting sick or disease, or like, oh, but what is in that great no thing, nails all of that stuff, and, like, really just brings Eddie to life in a way that I don't think we've really gotten previously. And it's, same with everybody here. Jaden Martel, I don't want to say typecast, but when he's in these types of roles, he's really, really good, and he crushes the Bill stuff. Really makes you feel for him as an older brother, and the guilt that he has throughout the movies because of not being with Georgie when Georgie gets taken. The stutter, not being someone with a stutter, I don't know how accurate it is, but it certainly felt natural, and I thought he really crushes it, so that when you get to that monologue at the end of the movie where Richie's like, he didn't stutter once, it's really impactful, and you sit there like the rest of you going, oh crap, he didn't, and it's because, he pulls you in, does a really good job. Wyatt Oleff as, Stanley Uris, really, really good, man. That timid, kind of like Eddie, but no, the personality is more timid just as much as, like, being scared of everything. Personality-wise, he's kind of that more quiet, inward person, and I think that, Wyatt Oleff does a really nice job with that stuff, and his scary moments are some of the best in the movies. But, like I said, really, really enjoyed him. Sophia Lillis as Young Bev, great stuff. Again, that's one of those characters where there's some really, really tough stuff to adapt, And Muschietti, I think, does a really good job of it, and Lillis does a really good job of delivering the performance where, without having those full story beats all the way in there, so it's like in front of you, we're like, oh, damn. Like, you get the things that she's afraid of. And, again, somebody that just visually popped on screen a lot. Chosen Jacobs, I did think that the Mike storyline got a little underserved in Chapter 1. I didn't like that he wasn't the historian of the group. Granted, it plays well into Ben's storyline and his personality type, and they do give Mike the historian element in Chapter 2. It just would have been nice to have given Chosen Jacobs that stuff. But what he does on screen makes Mike, interesting, and you're able to invest pretty quickly, considering that I think he probably gets the least amount of screen time out of the Losers Club. And then Jeremy Ray Taylor playing young Ben Hanscom. Again, really nice job. Super adorable kid. And you feel for him, man. When he gets bullied, you are appalled by some of the things that we see, but you really feel for, Ben and Jeremy Ray Taylor's performance of taking that, absorbing that stuff, and being able to keep going forward. And this thing is really, really good. And then when you get to Chapter 2, holy cow, the casting job that Andy Muschietti did. I mean, you want to talk about spot-on adult versions of these kids. When it comes to Eddie, James Ransom is literally a grown-up Jack Dylan Grazer, to the point where they do a shot where he's on screen and they start to dissolve him out, and Dylan Grazer walks up to the exact same frame where his head is in the same place, and they look like it's crazy how good that casting is. And Ransom does a really, really good job. He takes all the things that Dylan Grazer does in Chapter 1 and applies them to Chapter 2 in the ways that an adult Eddie should act and respond to things that are going on. And again, has the fast talking down really, really well. Has that kind of dude, no, man, I ain't doing that type of stuff down really well. And I like the way that they play on screen, specifically him and Bill Hader, who plays Richie. And again, you want to talk about crushing a casting. While Bill doesn't necessarily look exactly like Finn, he encapsulates everything that Finn Wolfhard gives you in Chapter 1 and just delivers a Richie that is so intriguing, and that they're able to give some storyline beats to that I didn't see necessarily coming. And I thought Bill Hader really, really nailed these small, again, subtle moments where, you kind of find out that Richie is gay, and how he plays with that in the subtlety. And it's one of those things where, Chapter 2, people were could have dove more into that. Yes, but at the same time, I think Hader's performance and the little that they have in there is enough to really drive home those points and kind of nail all the stuff that's going on internally inside of Richie. And it's something that, Finn doesn't really have to take on in Chapter 1, although he gets a chance to do so in Chapter 2. Bill just really does a great job, and I love Bill Hader and knew that he was going to crush the Richie stuff, and he really does. Then when you have Andy Bean, we get him for a very short amount of time as adult Stanley, but it's super impactful. He bookends the movie. The start and end of Chapter 2 are really, really a really, really intense moment with Stanley and a really, really heartwarming moment with Stanley that together just build this heartbreaking moment that lives, and Andy Bean does a really good job delivering that stuff. Then when you have Jay Ryan, think he might have been a little too good looking for Ben. I know that Ben is supposed to be, the overweight kid in Chapter 1 and then the not overweight guy in Chapter 2, but I almost felt like Jay Ryan was too good looking for his own good, where it's when he played some of that insecure Ben stuff, it doesn't pop, I think, the way that it should, because I don't get the sense that this was a fat kid at any point in time, with Jay Ryan. But that aside, I do think he does a pretty good job with what they give him, and he has some nice moments in the movie. And while casting-wise, I don't think it's the best sync-up, what his delivery is pretty good. It just does not fit that physical appearance that you see at all, which I suppose could be a really good thing. That one I probably think is the biggest stretch as far as casting goes. But a really nice job from Jay Ryan. Isaiah Mustafa, like I said, gets to have the adult Mike storyline stuff that I thought was missing from the young Mike, and the historian elements and the things that he does, especially with introducing the ritual of Chud and just kind of how he plays into all that stuff. I like that performance. That, like, when you get to the end and you understand he's had the secret the whole time, you really feel it in the way that he's performing through the whole movie when you look back. And then you've got Jessica Chastain. I think that was the one casting that every single human alive was like, oh, when we get to adult Bev, you got to go Jessica Chastain. And Muschietti went Jessica Chastain, and I think pays off. I think she does a really nice job. And she, too, really holds a lot of the qualities that I think you get from Sophia Lillis's version of Bev, that makes her feel like an adult version of her. And the way that she grips with the traumas of her childhood on screen creates some really nice moments for Chastain. And then James McAvoy, I mean, love this guy, and really does a wonderful job of taking what we get from Jaden Martel as Bill and applies it to this adult version of Bill. I mean, from the stutter to, like, as that horror kind of seeps in and gets to Bill and the things that eat at Bill. I just think McAvoy does a really good job portraying it, that when you get to the back half of the movie and he goes to try to save that kid, you're feeling all that stuff that has been weighing on Bill since day one. So casting-wise, I mean, I thought they just did a wonderful job in both movies. And then, obviously, there's one guy who plays in both movies besides just the kids that is a major player in both movies, and that, of course, is Bill Skarsgard as Pennywise himself. And I think it's one of the most immediate, iconic performances you get in the genre, as Bill not only, met the expectations I think that people had, he portrayed and delivered a Pennywise that stands toe-to-toe with Tim Curry's. I mean, the way he can point his lip, the way he drools when he kind of zones out and gets lost, just the way he becomes that clown is terrifying. And all of the set pieces that he's in, the way he moves his body, or the way he'll giggle or come running at you, like, everything Bill does from a physicality standpoint to a delivery standpoint is pure perfection for me. And when you add all of that stuff together, you end up with two movies that make a really, really excellent movie as one. Like I said, I'd love to see that Ultimate Edition that runs like 6-7 hours long. But as I said, the other thing that really pops for me in these movies, and in both, are those visions or embodiments of it in different forms. Those different monsters that it takes on, and we're gonna quick talk through my favorite moments and kind of who they reside for. And for me, I think Eddie has some of the best stuff in both movies as far as his run-ins with Pennywise. That leper scene at the Neibolt house. The leper is just genius from a creation standpoint, and look and feel, like, horrifying and grotesque. But just the interactions that he has with the leper, both at Neibolt as young Eddie, and then underneath the pharmacy in the basement as young and old Eddie. They're really, really they're some of the most terrifying things in the movie, just because the visual look of that leper is terrible. And then when he vomits that black-brown gunk, woof, you know what I mean? But on top of that, I mean, Eddie does have some of the best moments with Pennywise. That one-on-one in Chapter 1, which Bill talks about being the first time he was, like, physically on set with the kids. They kept him away from all of them. They didn't want him to see him. And he's, like, screaming and spitting, and, Jack Dylan Grazer is crying, and, he's like, we finish, and Dylan Grazer's like, dude, great job, man. Like, you're doing a great job. Meanwhile, Bill's like, I thought I'd traumatize that kid for life in the middle of the scene. But, like, that stuff is really harrowing, and that whole sequence with Pennywise, just, like, from the ending of the fence post going through his head to, like, coming out of, like, that closet and his body unraveling while his head stays still, like, just really, really terrifying stuff with the physical embodiment of Pennywise. And some of the best Pennywise stuff is in that moment. Then you also get the Stan Spiderhead, which belongs to Eddie, Bill, and Richie. But that moment is, like, you're missing Stanley in that movie big time. But that's how it is in the book. and I guess the book going back and forth, it works better. Like, it always kind of feels like Stanley's around. Where the separating of the two, you kind of lose Stanley, but bringing him back in as a corpse in that same refrigerator that Pennywise comes out of in the Meatball house that first time. Oh, dude, it's one of the most horrifying things ever. When the body horror elements, like when those legs come out of his face and his head rolls off and turns into a spider, is just horrifying. And granted, that one's probably the scariest for Richie in that scene. You know, Eddie is scared, paralyzed, you know. But another one of those moments that really, really pop. And then also one of those shared moments, he shares it with Richie in Chapter 2, the not scary, scary, very scary doors. The Pomeranian play is just wonderful. Like, it's such a perfect setup based on what they did. Like, it's one of those things Muschietti sets up in Chapter 1 and just nails it on the come home in Chapter 2. And watching Richie tell Eddie how it should work because of what him and Bill went through the first time around is just wonderful, right? Like, by the time you get to the end, we're like, next time, we're just doing regular scary, okay? And he's like, next time? I love those sequences, and for me, like, that's where, of the kids, I think Eddie gets the best monster bits. For me, number 2 would be Bill. Like I said, he does get the first half of that scary, not scary, very scary, or not scary, scary, very scary bit inside the Neibolt house, where when they go to not scary, it's Betty Ripson's like hanging corpse, and then when you get with Eddie and Richie on the back half, you get the bottom part of her corpse in the the not scary. Just great stuff. But Bill gets the first like real encounter with Pennywise after Georgie. The Georgie opening scene is one of the best in all of the movies. It is perfection when you're talking about adaptation. And just that intro of, I'm Pennywise, the dancing clown. Pennywise, yes. Meet Georgie. Georgie, meet Pennywise. And like now we're like, dude, this stuff freaks me out so bad. And that's the first time that we get him. But then when we get that basement water sequence where Bill has Georgie talking to him, but then it becomes like Pennywise comes up out of the water and then does that first like crazy run. That scene in the theater freaked me out. And while that is one of those real solid freaky moments, you probably get the best scene in almost any of the movies after Georgie into that funhouse sequence with McAvoy is just wonderful. And when you get to that maze of mirrors and windows, and he's forced to watch Pennywise take down this second kid, lose another kid, Bill. And Pennywise just banging on that glass till it shatters, and he eats, that whole sequence is just wonderful. I mean, even, from the production, when he goes into the thing that spins, the camera stays fixed so it turns upside, everything working in that sequence is just tremendous. And it's one of those things that I think really, really works for Bill. You also get that first encounter that he has with the sewer drain. I think from the emotional beats in the movie, it's one of the more impactful ones, because you get to see young Bill have that conversation with Pennywise, and then, adult Bill kind of end up in the same way so that he ends up with the wax boat. But really, really, really good stuff from McAvoy in and around the Pennywise and different versions and scares that he kind of brings up. And then he's also in that Stan Spider head moment when he's trying to pull it off him. But just really, really good stuff. So I bring Bill in his moments at number 2. Richie's come in for 3 with me. I love the, he doesn't see Pennywise at all the whole movie. And then you get that missing child, I'm not missing in the Neibolt house before he goes into the room with all the clowns, and having the Tim Curry Pennywise in that room as a doll. Like I said, perfection, Muschietti. But that moment's wonderful. I love watching the way Bill Skarsgard pops out of that coffin. And it's just it's that first scary moment for Richie outside of the garage. And I love Finn Wolfhard's reactions in those moments. Then, like I said, he's also in that not scary, scary, very scary. He's the only one that does it both times. And in both instances, I just like the way that both Finn and Bill Hader play those scenes. It's some of the more fun elements of scares that you get in the movie. And then also, he's in the Stan Spiderhead moment. He's the one that is visually should be the most terrifying aspect of that. He is the one getting attacked by the Stanley, so it's gripping to his head right No, great stuff there. And then for me, I think it's probably like my third favorite scare scene in the whole movie, the Paul Bunyan stuff with young Richie. That leads into adult Richie with Pennywise coming off of Paul Bunyan with the balloons. But the Paul Bunyan chase, while I think in the book that happens to adult Eddie, using it with Finn Wolfhard's character and giving an additional scare there, I thought was great. I just love that chase, and then that final pop where it's like you think you're okay and you turn and he's there and his mouth opens and the wood is splintered into like all those jagged sharp teeth. Wonderful, again, from a visual and from a scare standpoint. Then for me, I go Bev. The bathroom sink moment is one of the most grotesque and long-lasting, affecting moments in the movie, and really, really, really well executed. The way that it just turns the entire, very similar to the Freddy Krueger Nightmare on Elm Street scene with Johnny Depp and the bed. But here it is actually just shooting out and then filling that room where everything is just red. And poor Sophia, man, having to sit there and take that to the face like that, I wouldn't wish that on anybody. That is a really spot-on looking version of fake blood. That moment just rings so true to the character and what that moment means, and I just think nails that stuff. And then flip side, in chapter 2, you get the bathroom stall blood rising up sequence, which Muschietti does some fun things with. And I like what we get out of Chastain there too. And visually, just watching anything fill up with that much blood is terrifying to watch. But then you have the old lady in her old house, Mrs. Kirsch. That sequence is one of those weird builds where it's like she's in the background as Bev's kind of walking around, and you see her like freak out when she walks, and then she runs by naked, and then when she comes out as that big, like you hear those stomps, and we'd seen that in the trailer, and then you got the payoff of the visual, and then Mrs. Kirsch, horrifying! But then I also like that you add in the element of like those early clown days of Pennywise, where you see like that image in that framed picture, and then when she runs out of the house, he is the circus version of Pennywise, putting on the makeup and ripping his face off. Again, really chilling visuals in those sequences. So I love the Bev stuff. Then at 5, I probably go Stanley. While he really only gets one moment per se, outside of the spider head stuff, which is visual. The painting scene in chapter 1, that visual of Pennywise is just horrifying. The contorted face, and then leading in later on to like Pennywise actually latching onto Stanley's head. For having the least amount of scenes with Pennywise, the Stanley stuff is stuff that I think sticks with me. So I go him 5. I bring Ben in at 6. The library mummy scene is pretty solid. And again, I like the execution of the mummy visual wise. Then it's pretty much all chapter 2. The burning head Bev scene is wonderful. It's with young Ben, and like watching like the use of the shadow when he looks up and thinks it's Pennywise, and then he turns around, it's Bev. But then her head bursting into flames and chasing him down that hallway. There's just something about a visual of flaming hair that's terrifying. And I love that that scene ends with him getting into the locker, and then Pennywise is right there, and same thing, you get another one of those freaky Pennywise runs that kind of, boom, flashes us back into adult Ben. And then really the only direct moment, or kind of scary thing, I think, for adult Ben, is having home carved into his stomach. Watching that happen with nothing there is visually terrifying, and then when you see that reflection in the mirror and Pennywise is actually there doing it and he cuts his throat, love that stuff. And even the buried alive sequence is really solid, because that idea of claustrophobia is terrifying. I was sitting watching it last night like, damn, if that was happening, like that'd be the worst way to go. Like you just know there's no way you can stop it. So I really like the Ben stuff. Mike, the least served of all of the 7, is 7 for me. The alleyway scene with all the hands coming out of the burning building, going back into his story. It's a pretty solid scare, but like I said, he's pretty much underserved in chapter 1 a lot. In chapter 2, he's already figured out everything. Outside of the come home stuff you get at the very beginning, I don't remember there being a direct Pennywise like monster bit, but I do love the Ritual of Chud stuff that they give adult Mike, and the visuals of Pennywise in that sequence, even though it's Bill seeing it. I dug all of those things. And then you have to leave the Losers Club to get to this one other person that deserves to be talked about, and that's Henry Bowers. His Pennywise interactions are pretty fantastic. The Pennywise being in the TV, leading him to killing his dad, I love that stuff. And then maybe the best visualized monster in either of the movies is the Patrick Hockstetter zombie that leads up. That is one of those first jump scares that like really gets you, because you're thinking it's gonna be Pennywise. Like, we know he's Pennywise. He's already seen Pennywise in Chapter 1. He wants to kill everybody for Pennywise. So you figure Pennywise is going to be under the bed. And when that balloon pops, also the visualizations of the balloons in the movies, wonderful. When that balloon pops and Patrick Hockstetter comes running out of there, I jumped, man. And that visual is just so excellent. And then I like what they do, for the most part with Henry in the movie. Like when he's under... that Pennywise spell, and he attacks both Eddie and Mike in Chapter 2. Really fun stuff, and horrifying things in Chapter 1. Young Henry, old Henry's gross, but young Henry is, man, he does some, beyond horrific things for any bully. Top 5 bullies of all time right there. I mean, when he starts carving his name into Ben, good lord. But like I said, man, the visuals and the story, just everything in this master horror epic is just brilliant. So much so I've been talking for almost half hour. I'm gonna stop. I just love these movies so much. There's so much fun to be had. There's so much to jump into and dissect. You can see my individual reviews, like I said, down below in the description. But at the end of the day, big fan of Muschietti. Hope we get that ultimate cut one day. And really, I mean, one of the most iconic newer, characters, portrayal-wise. Bill Skarsgard's Pennywise. C'est magnifique. And the rest of these casts, both kids and adult, just wonderful stuff across the board. So I love It Chapters 1 and 2. What about you, man? What are your thoughts? Where do you land in the It Chapter 1 and 2? The idea of splitting the stories out rather than telling them in that back and forth manner that we got in the miniseries and the book itself. Have you read the book? Have you watched the miniseries? Where does this new version land in amidst all of those things? Anything you're thinking about Itch Chapter 1, Chapter 2, its characters, Pennywise, Bill Skarsgård, Andy Muschietti, good, bad, and different, down below in the comment section. As always, if you enjoyed this video, please give me a thumbs up. And if you're new, you want to come hang out with C-Man the rest of Spooktober, you haven't yet, jump over there, join the C-Maniacs by hitting that subscribe button, hit that little bell if you want those alerts. Until next time, from C-Man's Cinema, sit down. I've been the C-Man. I'm signing off. Bye. You guys are still here? You must be looking for some more content. Well, don't worry. C-Man's got you covered, man. You got videos like this guy and this guy. And if you haven't yet, and you want to come check out all the C-Man goodies, join the Cinema Sit-Down Squad, man. Hit that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit the little bell down below that, too, so you can get alerts every time I make new videos.